Hello, it's Mirta from the Meltlands still, because it's friggin' hot where I am, and I end up just recording videos at 5 a.m. because otherwise I would be going crazy. Side note, I love this dress IRL, but it looks very, very awkward on camera, especially with the amount of cleavage that it has. So I'm just trying to hold myself in any way possible so that everything looks decent, nothing slips, but because of that, I might look a little bit awkward. I bring to you a theory. A very big theory that I have been working on and fuming on for quite a while, which is I think Itzaland is one big experiment from Infold. I don't think it has a unified design pattern or any specific thoughts put behind it when they were going forward with it. I do think that it replaced Wasteland, but I don't think that it is Wasteland renamed. Wasteland, by the way, was a region in previous Nikki games where Infold was playing around with Middle Eastern, African, or American indigenous fashions. They are also known for portraying people not super flatteringly. Itzaland is sort of the location right next to where Wasteland was, and Sovereign of Sexy was very much hinting to this being the replacement for Wasteland, but here's the thing, I don't think that it is. I think Infold deleted the most, from their perspective, problematic part of the game. From players' perspective, possibly the most problematic, but also the most diverse part of the game, and they instead didn't know what to do going forward, and their design philosophy shows it, or rather, lack of there being any coherent themes. We're sitting in front of banner images because this video was originally supposed to be about lack of diversity in banners inside 2.0, and I don't mean lack of visual diversity. They are very diverse visually. What I do mean is lack of cultural inspirations that are coming outside of Western world or Europe or during Chinese patches, China. I think we had seen very little of that, and I think I sort of understand why. I might not like it, but I sort of understand why. So this is a whole very big and filthy thing, and I think where we ended up with is where developers are trying to throw different things at the walls and see what sticks. And because of that, we're in such a weird place right now. They are finding over time what is sticking, but it also might mean that going forward, we might have more concentrated themes with more parts that stick rather than parts that don't. I'm trying to explain it as best as I can. So let's start the basis of my argument. This is 2.0 banners. One Middle Eastern inspiration is directly behind me. The behind prayers set and her 4-star counterpart, very Catholic. Very Catholic. That's in no way exploring any other theme whatsoever with that, pretty much. Born Flawless, I want to call her the gala dress. She's supposed to be goddess. I have read a whole article about how they designed that outfit. To me, it's giving gala and it's still giving Western. She's supposed to be dragony, she's supposed to be goddessy, but I'm just not seeing any diverse cultural inspirations. Sorry for the crunchy image. This is the only image where I could get both the 4-star and the 5-star inside the same frame. 2.1, very Western fairy tale-y, and Italian Renaissance is where I want to place this. 2.3. We're skipping 2.2 because 2.2 was a Chinesey patch. Yeah, girlies, not seeing any cultural diversity here. 2.4. Italian steampunk, naked Red Riding Hood, and obviously Western fairy tale. I'm not even gonna speak about the 4-star because the 4-star just looks like a couch. 2.5. Western wedding dress, dragony, whatever this is, and Western armor set. 2.6. A raveny, masculine-esque outfit that for some reason still smells of Italy to me. And a ball gown. Do you see where I'm going with this? I don't think that Itzaland was ever meant to be Wasteland. And let's just look at its narrative themes as well. When you enter Itzaland, the first half just deals with mushroom people. I think this is something that I'm gonna explore in a different video, but I think mushroom people at some point were supposed to be people, and then the design decisions have really pivoted from there, because Infold might have realized that they would be offending quite a large amount of their audience in the West if mushroom people were people. And I think that the Sovereign of Sexy is sort of a leftover from a previous design decision, because he's like the only native human in there pretty much whatsoever, and everything else is just people or travelers from the rest of Mirrorland going in and trying to establish communications with Terra Alliance. I think that the design decisions for what Itzaland is shifted significantly during the whole of Itzaland. We also see them completely overhauling the combat system. So 1.1, 1.0 to 2.0 is a huge shift, because now instead of purification you have archery. They're trying to make it a more combat-oriented game that has definitely super amped up in 2.5. There's a lot of experimentation going on, honeys. And then in 2.5, we have a people society, but they're not really indigenous to the Terra Alliance at all. We're having people society, but they're a closed-off Parksolian soul-ferrying group. And they're not really taking any inspiration from indigenous African or Middle Eastern fashions, like you would expect in the Wasteland region. They're kind of their own thing, and they once again sort of feel loosely based off Western, maybe a little bit of Eastern mythology, but it's just, it feels like Infold's being very careful with that region. It feels like they're not touching on the areas that people sort of expected them to touch upon. I think between 2.0 and 2.5, they learned that mushrooms just don't work. I don't know if this is where they just always were planning to take the story, but 2.5 story beats are definitely getting a lot more engagement from people than 2.0 story beats, but I do think that they're kind of late with that, because 2.0 story beats kind of scared off a lot of people that wanted a more serious, more human focused story, and now we do have that with dragon people that have nothing to do with Terra Alliance whatsoever. There's also a huge tonal shift between 2.0 and 2.5. 2.5 being more death and ferrying and loss and ghosts focused, and I think that that sells well. I also think that that is the primary design philosophy at the moment. Ball gowns likely sell. Ball gowns likely sell, and this is how we're arriving at where we are. I think what Infold is doing is they're trying to optimize their income, and they're trying to just throw everything at the wall and see what works and what doesn't. And they're doing this through throwing things at the wall that they have already explored as a theme, rather than throwing new themes at the wall. In general, this makes Itzaland really disjointed. Wasteland was already disjointed, but Itzaland is just disjointed times 2. I can obviously see the story progression, and the story progression obviously makes sense, but imagine if you had to answer this question. What is Itzaland's story arc as a region culturally based upon? Condense 2.x to me and give me a theme. And I can do that with 1.x. Loosely Western storytell vibes. I can't do that with 2.x. Because I think Infold themselves didn't quite know exactly how to approach the region and where they wanted this to go. Now, this is slightly problematic for players playing, because the primary thing that was as a complaint in 1.x is the lack of diversity inside banners. We got loosely Western fairy tale themed banners, and we got Chinesey themed banners on Chinesey themed patches. There were so many people bored of like ball gowns and fairies and the whole vibe. And what they got from other players is, well, just wait for 2.0. They're gonna obviously have a very specifically themed package with an easy to recognize theme that's gonna be unique from 1.0, right? And from what I've seen, I don't think that that's what they prepared. I think that they took the area, which they probably didn't want to do, due to it maybe lacking a coherent theme to begin with, maybe giving them too much backlash from Western players. There could be all reasons why they might not want to do Wasteland. So they made it Terra Alliance, and they decided to not just like make it a proper Terra Alliance, but sort of skirt it on the edge. We're now more than halfway through the whole patch cycle, and the only part of Terra Alliance that we really saw was the Mushroom people, because, well, Perxolians are once again, they're their own isolated group, and it feels like the story will mostly deal with Perxolians from here on end, and I like that. I liked the Perxolian story beats a lot more than I liked the Mushroom story beats. But I don't think that Infold is willing to even touch Wasteland with a 10-foot stick, even after having renamed it to Terra Alliance and trying to make it more coherent. I think we're kind of skirting the whole issue, but at the same time, we're skirting a lot of outfit diversity, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a whole bunch of themes that are vaguely reminiscent of Wishfield themes played out inside our banners again, and we're seeing a coherent story, but it's not a coherent themed package. In a game where people expected a coherent themed package because they were bored of the Western fairy tale vibe. Now, why might this be? This level of window will work, why not? It's not well positioned, but it will do. So welcome to Google Trends. Google Trends tells you when any game word had the most hype around it and was the most searched for, and they rank it on a relative scale for the word itself from 0 to 100. This means that if there was like super a lot of searches for it on one period and like 50% less on another period, then we have like 100 and we have 50 established. So once it establishes 100, it ranks relative popularity starting from there. We have this one for Genshin Impact. And Genshin Impact's curve, while it's falling off, do remember it's an old game now. It's gonna, be 6? So for a gacha, 6 is fairly old. So in comparison, this is what a healthy curve should look like. When it started at 100 with major patches. It was still reaching 70, 84, 80, then it declined to 64, 62, 52. So in comparison, by 2025, Genshin Impact was at the curve level of 48 compared to 100. So it lost about 50% of its hype in 5 years, which is a very long amount of time. And you see later on dates, January 2026, still reaching 44% hype compared to the first highest hitting amount. And that's gonna be a lot of players still. That's gonna be a game that's bleeding fairly slowly. You wanna see what Infinity Nikki looks like? And this is something that has actually been brought up by other creators in private to other creators. Because Infinity Nikki is not trending, which means that for people whose social media is their livelihood, they're very de-incentivized to create content for Infinity Nikki because they know that they're not gonna get the views that they require in order to continue their livelihood going. Which means that creating Infinity Nikki content is always a hit to your livelihood, and that's now a problem that Infinity Nikki community creators are running into. They brought up the curve, but they brought up a small amount of the curve, mostly trying to say that the interest has dropped off between 2.0 and today. I bring you the full curve, which tells a completely different story. So this is the launch hype, and the launch hype is at 100%. The hype falls down really fast. 1.5, the disaster patch, was already at 1/5 of the interest of launch. And the interest has been revived a little bit because it has been a disaster patch. People got interested in the drama, but their interest between December 2024 and May 2025, so we're looking at what, 5 months? It has dropped to 1/5, actually a bit under 1/5. Remember Genshin Impact curve. Genshin Impact is yet to drop to 1/5 of its original interest. Do you see why this looks bad? Now, let's look at December 2025, which is when 2.0 releases. It's now closer to 1/10 of the interest of the original game's release. And it's a bit lower by 6 points from the drama point. And it continues going like that. We have 6 for May. We don't have further information because, well, processing for June is not done yet. 7 for April, 8 for March, 7th of February. And people see this reflected in their views, so influencers are panicking a little bit about this. I'm sure that Infold are also seeing it. But what I'm trying to say is that this curve didn't somehow start dropping at 1.5 when we had the disaster patch. I'm not trying to say that this curve started dropping at 2.0 when we explored the mushrooms. I'm trying to say that the game had a very fast drop-off of interest starting directly after 1.0. I think when you have this kind of interest curve, you're very much incentivized to heavily experiment. And I think that that is what Infold is doing. So, unfortunate for some Infinity Nikki creators that can do multi-game channels that are focusing on more than one gacha and that are upset with the lack of views that Infinity Nikki is carrying, because I think that at some point they're gonna have to drop off this train due to the lack of views, or continue taking severe hits to their viewership if they want to continue going forward. Because I don't think that Infold, no matter what they do, can reach the interest peak that was December 2024. Like, I don't think that we're getting there ever again. However, what they can do is take a year to experiment and iron out exactly what works and what doesn't. And I think that that explains quite a lot about what they're currently doing. I think that that explains why a lot of banners feel safe or feel like something that we have already seen. I feel like that explains the sharp change in combat. I feel like that explains why we, for a long time, had weird management games for, like, bars and saunas and hot pot. I honestly think that they're trying to throw a lot of mechanics and a lot of ideas at the wall and see what sticks. At the same time, I think that they're averse to taking significant risks because they already see where the line is holding. Therefore, banners based on, let's call it, previous Wasteland probably feels already risky. They might have tried the waters a little bit by, like, releasing the whole head item, which was in kind of poor taste in 2.0. And I think from there on they pivoted and they were like, nope, not doing this. I wish that they would take more risks in that matter, though. I don't think that there's a lot of people that are excited for, like, the 19th ball gown. It's not 19, I am exaggerating, but what I mean is people wanted a fashion change, and I think Infolds are kind of scared to do a fashion change because they know where their numbers are at. And they know that they need to pull off something significant to change how the numbers are going. And I think that taking the region that was always problematic to experiment with game mechanics, what works, what doesn't, and to nail down the themes that your people want, and to nail down the kind of NPCs that your people want, and to nail down the kind of story progression that your people want. From a business standing point, it's probably smart. It's probably smart to take just like that year and turn it into something that later on you can turn into a profit. But unfortunately, that's where my whole theory comes in, that there's not a unified design philosophy and decision behind 2.x saga of Infinity Nikki. There's probably vague, unified story beats. But what we're receiving in live as a story probably was still changed and altered as they went along. So they know where the story goes, but I think that they're replacing elements as we go along and go further to A, avoid any controversial topics that might hit them very, very hard, and B, to kind of check and gouge interest where their player interest lies, effectively. I think that's what they're doing. I don't know, should that make me concerned for 3.0 or not. Other regions have safer themes, culturally speaking, and they also have more well-established and polished themes. You can't F up modern. You can't F up space sci-fi. It's probably harder to F up religious zealotry the region. It's a very specific theme, but also it's very flexible in how you can execute it. So as long as it's vaguely on theme, it works. It's not as culturally sensitive, and there's a lot less culture mashing. But at the same time, if they're playing it safe during their experiment years, my fear is that they won't want to play it dangerous at any other point as well, which means that when it comes to cultural diversity in clothing, when it comes to even clothing diversity, and getting sets that include, I don't know, how about a pair of pants? If they're afraid to do that sort of experimentation now, when it feels like they threw everything at the wall to see what sticks, I think that they're gonna be doubly afraid to do that kind of experimentation later on. Which means that the width of fashion that we're gonna get is probably not that wide, it's probably like this wide. That's my theory, that's my guess, and I know that even this video feels a tiny bit vague because I'm trying to incorporate multiple topics into one. Effectively, what I'm trying to rationalize out, is how we arrived here, and I think I can see how we arrived here. But I don't know, guys, that's just my theory, so feel free to tell me in the comment section down below if you think I'm correct or incorrect, but do remember I am speculating here, and I'm speculating here off publicly available information. I don't have some sort of like private window into Infold. I don't actually know what's going on in their heads. I'm just speculating it off what we got, off the really weird whiplash that you get going from 2.0 into 2.5 and beyond, and also into the kind of banners that we're getting, and also in just a fact of how their interest looks when it comes to this game, and just the fact that it hasn't started dropping at 1.5, it dropped off sharply at 1.0. And when you're faced with that as a game where you have mega success, and then very fast you have maybe 10% of that success remaining and holding on, I think you would be encouraged to just have a time to experiment, and what better place to do it in than the place that people already consider to be controversial and probably was never gonna go down too well for you either way. It makes sense to get that place out of the way, and it also makes sense to just throw everything that you want at it to try, as game mechanics, as fight mechanics, as doing NPCs, not doing NPCs, having fight companions, not having fight. Like, it makes sense to throw everything that you want to experiment with into that one big ball that people are already gonna dislike, and just let it loose, and then figure out what works and what doesn't and optimize from there going onwards. This could mean that we're gonna have a very good 3.0. This could also mean that we're gonna have a very conservative 3.0 and maybe 4.0 and 5, you know, how the game progresses further. But once again, those are just my ideas, those are just my way of thinking. Please tell me if you think that I'm wrong or right. This was just really spawned from me looking at our banners thinking this really doesn't make sense unless I take into account that Itzaland is not Wasteland. Itzaland replaced Wasteland, but it's not nowhere near. I think Info's not gonna touch that. That's just what I think. I would be glad to be proven wrong. So thank you for watching this very long deep dive into my thought process and what I'm thinking is currently happening with the game. Thank you so much for my Patreon supporters. If I am on this side, that means that you guys are yes, that way. And I hope I'm gonna see you on my other videos. Toodaloo.